Welcome to the IP2 Podcast. I'm Shay Ashby, and as always, I'm joined by Felix Chung.
We are honored to be joined by Yuki Lee Bender. She is one of the most successful Flesh and Blood players in our game today, from winning the Canadian National Championship in 2021 to the recent Calling Las Vegas 1 week ago, with numerous high placements and tournaments in between. Thank you so much for joining us today, Yuki.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm thrilled to be here and chatting with both of you. It's a pleasure and an honor.
So can you give us a little bit of an elevator pitch about yourself, a little bit about your background in games and your professional background and hobbies outside of FAB, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been pretty much playing cards most of my life. I was playing cards since I was in first grade, I think. Learned to play Magic the Gathering, mostly kitchen table. I didn't really know about what organized play was. I played all through elementary school and high school, though, and I knew the rules. I built decks. I more or less knew what I was doing. But I think gaming got more competitive for me when I started playing real-time strategy games. So Warcraft 3, StarCraft 2 were big ones for me. And then later I got into Hearthstone was kind of like when I got reunited with card games, and then eventually I revisited Magic with Arena because I wanted to draft. I learned that draft was a thing and I thought it was so cool. And so I was, go back and play Magic as only a limited player, which is actually what I did for quite a while around Guilds of Ravnica. So I think that's Ravnica Allegiance. So it's 2019-ish. I started playing 2018-ish, somewhere in there. And so that was kind of my first foray into competitive card gaming. Although mostly limited focused. And then I'd say Flesh and Blood, when I picked it up around Crucible of War, is the first game I got into in terms of constructed. Professionally, I'm a teacher. I actually went to business school, so I teach marketing, accounting. I have a minor in math, so I teach math as well. And that's sort of a lot of what I've done. That's been my day job. I'm actually kind of changing gears right now. I'm not returning to being a classroom teacher. I'm going to be substituting part-time and traveling a little more for FAB, doing some coaching, some writing, stuff like that. Just a little more flexibility. I can take about 3 days off of the year when I'm a classroom teacher, and there's not very many events. So I kind of had to make a choice of one or the other had to take a bit of a backseat. So I'm going to give it a shot and see how it goes. So far, so good.
Awesome. We're going to touch on that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah.
I'd like to start with the most recent topic. Last weekend was the Calling Las Vegas. Have you had a chance to look back and reflect on that week?
Yeah, kind of gradually. I was honestly in pretty big disbelief about the whole weekend. It was just really an incredible weekend. There was a lot of things that went well for me in the event. And just in my life too, I feel a lot of things have been kind of lining up. I'm happy with the direction I'm going in terms of work. I'm happy. I got to spend time with my girlfriend in Vegas, and that was really nice. And just stuff between us went really well there. And that's sort of long distance. So getting to try that out and see how that went was really wonderful. And just in a lot of ways, I felt a lot of things kind of lined up well for me that weekend. And it was it felt, I don't know, it was oh, how can this be real kind of thing. So starting to kind of come down from that a bit and just, it's sinking in, but yeah, it's definitely a really special weekend for me, for sure.
I had the opportunity to work on the judge side of the PTI event and the Calling on Saturday and Sunday, and I did watch you basically just plant your flag at the top tables or the top row the entire weekend at the Calling, and seemed like you were very calm and collected the entire time. I think you could tell there was a difference between yourself, maybe someone that has been there before, and maybe a lot of the others that I saw next to you that maybe were a little bit in disbelief or didn't know how to approach being in that situation, being an X1 or XO. Do you feel at this point it's pretty comfortable for you to be in a big tournament like that?
Yeah, I think some of that is definitely experience. I think some of it is also just mindset stuff. Going into events, I always want to do well. Of course, everybody wants to do well. But my focus is always much more on process and making good decisions and being happy with my gameplay. And that's like really what I'm always looking at. And I always try and, especially if I notice myself getting like a little bit stressed out or I'm like getting nervous, I try and focus back and go, okay, I'm going to go like one decision at a time, turn by turn, and just do what I've been doing and just try and execute as well as I can. And at the end of the day, like, we're playing a card game. You can get lucky and you can get unlucky, and nobody wins an event without getting lucky. I can tell you, I got lucky in a number of spots this weekend. There were spots where like I had to draw 3 of a kind and I drew 3 of a kind, or my opponent had to kind of miss and they missed, and that's what let me get back in the game. And you know, nobody wins an event without getting lucky. So I think just kind of like reminding yourself that you don't have full control and all you can do is give yourself the best chances is one way for me to really like take off the pressure, and so I just focus on the most important thing, which is the game and what you can actually physically control.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's also not the first time that I've heard somebody say that before also. So I think it's really starting to resonate with people that aren't professional, that you do need that aspect as well as playing well. So when it comes back to the event, when did you feel like you had a chance to do well? Like, was there a certain point in the event or the second day? You know, when did it kind of like click for you that this was a potential success?
I guess it's hard to say. Like, going into the event, I felt good about my prep, which is always nice. Like, sometimes you have events and you're like, oh, I don't know about my deck choice. I was like a bit on the fence about if I was going to play Icelander or Lexi. I played Icelander in the PTI event. It didn't go so well. I switched to Lexi, but I felt really confident. I played the deck a bunch. So that always feels good. And then I'd say maybe when I finished, I always feel like getting into day 2 is like a little tough. You play 8 rounds, you need to go X and 2, and it's like going 5 and 3 is not bad. Like you did pretty well for yourself, but you didn't make day 2, and ending day 1 at X and 1 is just a great feeling, because from there it's like, well, if I can go 4 and 1, then I top 8, and that's, you know, that's like a long armory or like a pro quest or something. Like I've done this before. That's okay. So probably when I was X1 at the end of day 1 was when it was like, oh, there's a real shot here.
Yeah, for sure. When you you kind of mentioned prep, are you always prepping, whether there's an event on the horizon, or do you specifically start a prep phase once you've committed to going to a major event?
Kind of both. So I definitely do prepare more when there's a major event on the horizon and when we get close to it. But I find it hard to maintain that level of engagement and focus with the game. Like it's really draining. And I put most of my free time into Flesh and Blood leading up to an event for a week or two. And you just can't keep doing that. But I'm often still thinking about and playing Flesh and Blood on the side. And I'd say that when we're approaching, it kind of shifts. So like if we're approaching Bright Lights, and I guess I still have Canadian National, so I'm still kind of in prep mode here. Yeah. That's coming up in a week as of when we're recording. But once that's done and we're shifting gears into Bright Lights, usually what I would consider prep is like, I'll pick up a new deck. I'll be like, I don't know how to play, I don't know, Dromai. Maybe I'm going to learn Dromai, or like I haven't played Dash, so like I haven't really thought about it, but maybe I would learn Dash now because there's a mechanologist set coming up, and I'll just go to Armory, I'll play some Dash, try and learn something new. And that's sort of a way of like having fun with the game and doing something low key, but also feeling like I'm making progress. And then I have another deck that I can play and feel okay about if I need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned Canadian Nats after your win in Vegas. How are you feeling about Canadian Nats?
Well, it's a pretty big confidence boost. It just feels good. It's like, okay, my CC is in a good spot. I generally consider myself a pretty good limited player. I'm a little bit more nervous about Monarch draft than other draft formats. I just feel like the decks are so powerful and you can just kind of lose. But I don't know. Feeling pretty good going into the event. I would like where I'm at. There's like a couple things to hash out in testing. Like I need to try out the Charles Dunn's deck. I haven't tested into that really much, and so that's something to figure out. But there's we got a week, so it should be okay.
Do you feel pressure to place well in events, or what kind of expectation do you set for yourself at this point?
I guess we sort of touched on this earlier, but I don't I don't like to put pressure on myself, especially not like results related pressure. I feel like focusing on results doesn't help me. It often hurts me. And it really is about focusing on like the process, the prep, and all of that, and just trying to do the best that I can. And I find that that's kind of like the biggest thing for me. That doesn't mean that I have like no goals or expectations. Like if I would love to win Canadian Nats, and I think in terms of like a goal, like I'd be pretty happy with the weekend if I top 8. If I top 8, I'll feel pretty proud of that, I think, regardless of how the top 8 goes. But I might not, and that's okay too. It's card games. It's part of it's part of it. And as long as I feel like I did a good job in that event and I played well, then I think I'll still be okay with the result.
Just to touch on something you mentioned a little bit earlier, you said that you're pretty confident as a limited player, and I'd just like to extend that to not only yourself, but a lot of the other strong players from Vancouver, where you're from. I think your whole city is known for being very strong at limited. And just to share something personally, that's something that I am very envious of in a way, because the previous 2 times I've been to nationals, I've been sunk by poor performances in the limited portion. And I'd love it if you could elaborate just a little bit more about why you like limited so much when it comes to games like you mentioned Magic the Gathering before, and now here in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, so my favorite part about limited is it somehow just feels like such a pure form of playing the game. Like all your cards matter. And it reminds me the most, like I mentioned, like growing up as a kid and playing limited. And I remember I remember having the experience of like opening up a booster pack and like not knowing what cards could be in that booster pack, and opening a card and just being like, wow, this is like so cool, and this can fit in whatever deck I'm building, and it makes my like, I don't know, my elf deck or my dragon deck so much better. And that's like really exciting. And limited is sort of like that for me. It feels like I get that excitement of like, oh, I got that yellow minnowism that like it's not a red one or a blue one, but I got a yellow, and it was the last pick of the last time I see a new card in pack 3. There's no other chances to get this card, and I got it, and it makes my deck so much better. And that's like really, really exciting. And I think being able to like play those commons that aren't the constructed level commons and make the most out of them and be excited about them and feel good about them is really, really special. And also like it's a very like creative and fluid process. And I kind of like that. I feel like as fun as constructed is, and building decks in constructed is interesting, a lot of the play patterns get like very fixed and kind of repetitive and mechanical, whereas limited is very dynamic and shifting, especially when it's at its best. Your decks can be so varied and different, and every game is kind of wild. And yeah, it's just I don't know, there's something about it that just like really kind of embodies what I feel like trading card games are like meant to be, even though we usually play constructed.
Yeah, no, the way that you've described it makes it sound incredibly interesting. And I know deep down behind every draft, behind every decision of what to pick, what to pass, what you hope to wheel, that all of those gears should be turning. But I don't know if it's just our community in particular, or for, again, anyone that feels like a bit of a disconnect between constructed and draft. Would you have any general advice to those people, how, to give draft another look? Would it be to try to appreciate the individual power level of each card in the way that you described with the yellow minnowism? Or what would you say to someone that's just struggling to make that connection?
Yeah, I guess if you're not, I think a lot of times like what I hear from, there's like a number of different things I hear from players, but I think like a big one is just trying to appreciate the cards for what they are and understand that like we're playing limited. It's gonna get a little bit scrappy. Our decks aren't perfect, but that's like kind of part of the fun. And just trying to like improvise and make the most of it is kind of special and part of the process, and everybody has that. Like nobody, you know, like if you have a draft deck, like of course, like, oh yeah, if I could change this card, I would change it. Like everybody's draft deck's going to be like that, no matter how good it is. And just trying to kind of like, rather than like fight that and be like, oh, I don't like my draft deck where it's like not that powerful compared to a blitz deck or whatever. Just like understand that you're playing not perfect flesh and blood, but you can still do really sweet things. And sometimes those low power drafts are really fun. Like I remember I had a game with Tarek Patel in last year's Nats. I think it was actually a feature match, and we were in a pod with 3 Dromais. Both our Dromai decks were really, really bad, like really bad. We didn't really have a way to kill each other, and just like that game was really fun and really interesting. And I remember making decisions like, I'm not going to play this yellow flex. I'm going to arsenal it and pitch 2 reds into it to attack for 5, so I get more value out of my yellow flex. And like 3 cards for 5 damage is awful, but when both your decks are terrible and you just need to get every little piece you can out of your deck, like that could be the difference. And it did end up mattering quite a bit. But I like things like that in limited, and it's not always intuitive, and it's not like I had thought about that beforehand, but you just go, wait a second, like this is important here. And I think, I don't know, just be open to making decisions you might not typically make.
I want to go back to the yellow mannerism for a second. Besides it being a great example, you already shaped the way I'm going to look at future drafts by not thinking, oh man, I would think of it as, too bad this isn't red, as opposed to it being like, great, this is yellow, this fixes a lot of problems. And even just the shift in the way you look at cards that you wouldn't necessarily want in your deck, I think can even just help change the way you look at your draft and your limited experience, and think of your deck in a more positive light, and then also retool the way you're building your deck. Whereas you might not necessarily want the card, but you realize it's going to fix a lot of problems in your deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can make the experience like more fun rather than scary. And I'll tell you, like some of the most satisfying drafts I have are when I think my deck's pretty bad and I still manage to get a 2-1 out of it. You know, it's like, this is not a good limited deck. It's not. If you had asked me if I'm happy with this deck and this is the deck I want for Nationals, like, no, this is not. Like, I'd love to do a redraft, but, you know, this is the deck that I have, and like, how can I try and get there? And, you know, you can do that through gameplay, you can do that through different things, but can you try to find a way to make it work? And that challenge is kind of special. And sometimes you even like 3-0 with a terrible deck, and then you have a fun story. So I don't know. One of my my podcast co-host, Jay, I think is like one of the most incredible people that I know for this, of just like playing the worst limited decks you've ever seen. And he just does so well with them. And you just, you know, hearing his stories, always laughing, always having fun. And I think that's a lot of it, for me at least.
It sounds like it's a place to be more creative as well, and find new lines, because you need to find different ways to apply damage, or even what is your win condition, like you mentioned before with the Dromai example. How are you going to close this game out?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to maybe add to what you're saying here, Yuki, about making the most of something bad or a deck that's a little bit suboptimal. One thing that I hear quite often from players is, oh, I lost this pod in the draft because the player next to me switched lanes, or I got train wrecked by XYZ, or just externalizing that locus of control, because it's hard to know a lot of the times, did you actually get train wrecked? Were you just doomed to failure before you even, you know, sat down to play your first game or not? That's scary. And even for myself, I mean, sometimes I don't know, like, this deck looks like garbage, but can I win? Or is it actual garbage and it can't win anything at all? And I guess my question to you would be, how often is it for, you know, a very good player like yourself in a pod with other players at your level to truly have something that's out of your control, and there's no way you can avoid going 1-2 or 0-3 in your pod? Is it as much as people think it is?
No, I think it is Not as much as people think it is. I think limited is really skill testing. I actually keep track of just like win rates and stuff like that across different heroes and different formats, and I do significantly better in limited. I win about 10% more of my matches in limited than I do in constructed and rated events. So I think that this idea that you don't have control over limited or it's random is like maybe just a lack of experience, or like maybe people just like not wanting to own up to that or not being able to see what their mistakes are. Like, so it can be hard to identify where your mistakes are sometimes, and limited is not always obvious. But I do think that, you can consistently do very well. And I feel like I very, very often 2-1 or better. Saying that, I did go 1-2 at Armory today. I think I had a good deck, though. I lost a very close game. I think I made a mistake in gameplay in the other game that I lost. So I'm not upset about the draft, and it happens. Everybody 1-2s or 0-3s. But I do think that strong players, if they really understand limited, will 2-1 the vast majority of the time. And I think a lot of it, like you mentioned, I like that you mentioned like the getting train wrecked or feeling like, oh, it's because someone cut me or whatever. And what I would say, if like that's what's giving you pause about limited, is try and focus less on like what happened to you and how you couldn't do anything, and reframe it to think about like, okay, I was drafting, I don't know, chain, and then there was 3 chains in the pod and my deck sucked. That's too bad. Well, was there a way that I could have noticed that this was happening during the draft, and I could have maybe picked cards slightly differently where I give myself a chance to not be the 3rd chain? And maybe this whole draft doesn't pan out that way. And of course, like at that point, everything changes and you don't know how the draft would go. But there's a lot of spots like that. Sometimes it's as simple as like, you look at a pack and you go, yeah, I have 3 chain cards, and there's a chain card in this pack, but it's like a yellow bounding, and that's not that great. But there's also this like Hooves of the Shadow Beast, and I don't have any Levia cards, but if I draft this, I could maybe be Levia. And if I don't draft the yellow bounding, like I'm not gonna miss it in my chain deck. I'm not gonna be like, wow, I wish I had that yellow bounding Demagon. It's like it's fine. I can give up a pick. And sometimes finding those spots to give yourself a little flexibility. And it doesn't mean like because I take the Hooves, I'm now Levia. It's just giving myself the option, well, now I have the Hooves, and if I have another weak chain pack and there's like a Dread Screamer or something, then like, yeah, maybe I am thinking about being Levia, and just looking to see if there's spots in those packs where you can go, actually, you know what? Thinking back, my hero was kind of cut, and maybe I had an opportunity to pick up a strong card for another class or draft a strong generic and give myself just like a little more flexibility, and maybe I could have wound up in a different seat. And I think if you start looking for those ways in which you can have more control and just focusing on the things that, your decisions and what you could have done differently, for one, is really interesting, and it will make you a way better limited player if you keep doing it. And for 2, I think it just takes away a lot of that like helplessness in the draft. I think more often than not, I'm reasonably happy with my deck. It's not always a 10 out of 10, but I'm like, this is a playable deck. I could 2-1 with it. I think most of the time I feel like my deck is pretty solid. And I think if you draft a lot and you practice a lot and you try to think in this way where you're focusing on what you can control and how to avoid those really bad drafts, I think you can learn to do it too. Like anyone can.
That's great advice, Yuki. Thank you so much. And honestly, in the last 10-15 minutes, you've filled me with a lot of inspiration to go out and try and fire up some draft pods here. Yes, my last question on this topic would be just going back just beyond just yourself and over to your community in Vancouver. And like you mentioned, there's yourself, there's Jay, and there's a lot of other players that are all very strong at limited. Do you think there's anything special about the Vancouver community that makes it such a concentration of players that are all interested? Like, is it a situation where, there's a couple and that's an infectious kind of interest, or is there something about your mutual backgrounds Or is there something in the water supply in Vancouver? I don't know what you guys are doing. Like,
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a couple of things at play. One of them is that I think to some degree it is a few people. You mentioned Jay and myself being huge advocates for limited and just loving limited. And also, in addition to that, Eric Lehrer was originally kind of like the main person TOing in Vancouver and who really got the scene going at all in the first place. Like there was no fab in Vancouver, and he TO'd and made a scene. And then in the Vancouver scene, like, owes a lot to Eric, I think. But Eric loves draft. Like, he just loves draft and limited. It's his favorite format. And so to some degree, Eric was running a lot of limited events because that's what he liked. And Jay and I were super excited about it. And I think when you have this like dedicated player base of people who really love limited, and you also are playing a lot of limited, because that's, I mean, for a long time in Vancouver, you couldn't play classic constructed. You could not play classic constructed armories. You could only play draft armories. There was like 3 places doing draft every week, and there was no CC armories. So I think to some degree, it's just like drafting a lot and the way that has gone. And I think it's also just drafting with players who understand limited and who like limited. And Jay and I and Eric as well are all like perfectly happy to look at people's decks if they want us to. Like, you know, we're not aggressive about it, but if somebody's like, hey, like, what do you think of my draft deck? I'll gladly take a look at it and give feedback and go, this works, this doesn't work, you're missing this, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of people in our community that started out, they came from LCGs, like Netrunner and L5R. We have a lot of people from those games, and there's no limited in those games. And I lose to those guys all the time now. I lose to them all the time in limited. So it's like, it's something that you can learn and get good at if you want to. But if you don't do it very much and you're kind of scared of it and you go, oh, I don't like limited, like you're probably not going to get good at it. But yeah, there's a lot of people that have come from games that didn't have any limited, and they I remember them even saying, they're like, you know, I show up at Armory every week and I could never beat you ever. Like, you beat me every single time. And I remember the first time I beat you and I was like, oh, I like, that didn't register with me. Like, I wasn't thinking about it in that way. I was just trying to enjoy the games, but that's cool. Like, I'm glad that you got that victory and that was rewarding. But I think that's a lot of it, is like having that experience and getting to learn from people. And we kind of just like all make each other better. Like, it's really cool to see. Sometimes we drive down to ProQuests in the US or something, and we'll have people who like are like solid Armory players, but they're not usually topping, and they'll go and they'll top 8 limited RTNs and stuff like that. And it's just yeah, I think it's just a matter of drafting with strong drafters, and you get better by doing it. Just like anything. If you play constructed with strong players, you get better at constructed.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your local scene in Vancouver? Like, how would you characterize the community there?
Yeah, I'd say that the scene is small but growing and pretty dedicated. So for a long time, our armories would be getting like 6 to 8 people. Recently, I think we're getting about 13-ish, sometimes 16 in that range. And there's like 2 armories that fire weekly, and then there's an armory that does, it's actually the one I went to earlier today. It's like they do 2 drafts in 2 drafts back to back, and they do it every other week. So it's like essentially like 2 armories at once, and then no armory, because they're a little bit farther out and people have to commute for it. It's about an hour drive from Vancouver, so it's kind of a nice way to spend the afternoon once in a while. But yeah, so we have 3 armories, 8 to 13 people. There's been kind of like an uptick recently, I would say. There's more people getting into the game, but it is small. Like for a ProQuest, we might get 20 to 30-ish kind of thing. It's not huge, but there's quite a few very strong players, I would say.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. Was your scene actually sounds to be very similar to ours in size, yet you guys seem to have a very strong local scene. I was going to ask you, do you have any idea what contributes to the strength of the player base there, and what could be considered a smaller scene?
It's hard to say. I think some of it is just that everybody's involved a lot. Like, I think our scene had like a huge leg up in the sense that I mentioned Eric TOing and running events and also playing in them. Eric played the game like super early and was playing with people from New Zealand like way back in the day and just had like a very good understanding of the game. Like at the start of the game, Eric was a really, really, really strong player and way ahead of the curve. And I think just having him at events and playing against him every week pushed me and a lot of other people to get better. And I think that's kind of all fed into itself. Like I did well at nationals the first time and I ended up winning 2021 nationals, and I've gotten so much stronger as a player, and I'm still going to armories and people are playing against me, and Eric's still there and Jay's still there, and we have people from the LCG scene who have had pretty big success in their respective games, and they're coming and they're playing against strong players and have a strong card game background themselves, and they're picking it up and getting better too, and we all kind of help each other out. I feel like what I hear from some friends in Ontario is that some of their scenes, like the strong players, just don't go to armories, and I think that's like it's a real shame, because it's like on one hand it's like, well, my armory is like not I get the sentiment like the armory is not like the most valuable gameplay for me because the players aren't as strong, but also like if you don't show up and you don't play with them, like of course they're not going to get better. You know what I mean? Whereas if you invest into your local community and you are present and you're there and you play with people and you help them, like they're going to get better too, and they'll help you get better, is sort of how I see it.
Yeah, Felix and I kind of believe the same thing, that a strong scene helps develop strong players, which then you can go out farther and obviously do well in more events. And one of the questions that I did want to ask you was, so somebody like yourself that is, I guess, pursuing this game professionally, do you attend armories, and how often do you attend armories, and how hard do you try to make those armories, and how, I guess also how important are they to you? Because I've heard that before, that pro level players or high level players don't attend armories because of that thing. It's not the most constructive to their gameplay and getting better.
Yeah, I do attend armories. I'd say, so I kind of mentioned there's like the 2 weekly ones and then the one bi-weekly. I would say that I usually make like roughly half of them these days. So I'll go to like one of the weekly ones and half of the bi-weekly ones, and sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But I do make an intentional effort to go. And there was a long time when I was going to every single armory because honestly, like, our scene was so small. I was just worried I wasn't going to get to play Flesh and Blood anymore if I didn't keep going. Just had to wanted to see the scene do well and wanted to see the scene grow. And I'm glad that it's like not in that place anymore, where like if I feel like I need to take a break, I can, and I don't have to worry about like the event not firing and then people not wanting to go. So I think that's positive, but I do intentionally try to make a point of going. I love my locals. They're awesome. They're a lot of fun to play with, and I like being out there. Sometimes if it's like, if I'm traveling, especially, I may miss an armory because it's just like, I don't know, I come back from Vegas, I fly in Monday morning. It's like, I don't know if I want to go to the Monday night armory tonight. So I don't make all of them. And maybe like right before an event, if it's the week before nationals, I'm kind of on the fence about my Monday night armory. If I can do some testing with somebody that I normally test with and work on something that I really need to work on and iron out for that event, I'll probably do that. But if not, I'll go to my armory instead and be pretty happy with that. But outside of those, like that crunch period right before the event, I'm pretty much always trying to go when I can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Moving on a little bit, you tweeted a few months ago about lacking events in the Northwest region of North America. How has your community adapted to being more distant to some of the more major events?
I think people to some degree have started traveling a little bit more. We often will like road trip and carpool down to Seattle and Portland area for ProQuests and RTNs. And it's to the point that like a lot of them sort of know us and they're like, oh, it's the Canadians. and because they see us down there. Yeah. So usually we'll try to find like a weekend where we don't have any and there's maybe 2 events down there, and we can go and hit the Saturday and the Sunday as a group, and that's pretty fun. I know some people went to Battle Hardened LA recently, and then Vegas we were all very excited for Vegas just because it's relatively close. Like it's a 2.5-hour flight. It's pretty doable. It's much different than flying to the Midwest where it's like, you know, you can't get a direct flight, so you're spending 8 hours on the plane and there's a time difference, and it's just like it's such a huge commitment to get there. It's really, really tough. So I think there's been a combination of like there actually just being a few more events on the West Coast since I tweeted that. Like at the time it was just like there really wasn't anything, and there have been a few more, which I think was kind of all I wanted. It was not that like we need all the events. It's just like, can we get a couple? And we have, which is fantastic. And then people also just being a little more willing to travel. Not everybody. I think some people we definitely have like people who just go to armories and locals and ProQuests if they're in town, and that's kind of it. But the more dedicated people are traveling a little bit.
Have you noticed a growth in the dedicated people that are playing the game that started to travel since they started and maybe gained more confidence in the game and playing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of them have been doing better and better. I know, to shout out a few people, Ian Smith, I believe, top aided. It was either the Battle Hardened in LA or the PTI event on the next day. One of the two, I believe he top aided. Eli also top aided the Calling recently, playing Lexi. He's been playing Lexi forever, and I talk to him about Lexi all the time because he's a local, and he's been enthusiastic about her since before she was super good in meta. And it's just cool to see him like go and do really well. And I think he had a pretty deep run in Baltimore too. Like he definitely day two'd. I think he cashed. He was like at the top tables, like pretty much right next to me until one of the last rounds. I think he might have lost like second last. I think he might have dropped down to X3 on like the second last round or something like that. So yeah, cool to see him doing well.
One more final question on the Vancouver scene. What are your thoughts surrounding the Battle Hardened coming up?
I'm super excited. I'm glad that we got a Battle Hardened. I'm curious to see what the attendance will be. I hope that it's good so that we can continue to have more. I know some people are planning to travel, like from Alberta and maybe Seattle and Portland area and the island. So I'm hoping we get, and the Okanagan as well. So I'm hoping that we get a lot of surrounding people coming in for the Battle Hardened, and that would be really exciting. So we'll see. To some degree, I'm like having trouble wrapping my head around it because there's been Vegas and nationals and just like so much stuff on the go. But very much looking forward to that.
Do you have any inkling of any more East Coast players that might be traveling out, like perhaps from Ontario or anything like that?
I know a few are. Like I know Rob from Sparko Geniuses. I know Nia Tran is. Nia's one of the people that I test with all the time, and a good friend. But I'm not too sure outside of that. Not to say there aren't people, but yeah, maybe Brody's coming. I don't know.
Yeah, Felix and I have talked about it a couple of times. We really want there to be a really good showing for Vancouver because of what you already said. Like, if we can show LSS that we might be light in population, but we're dedicated player base out there, that it'll help the West Coast events.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, Alberta will bring the numbers. It's exciting because our scenes don't really get the chance to cross over as often now that both scenes have enough like tier 2 type of events. And I know, it's a fun test of skill for us because we don't get to play against you guys as often.
Yeah, it comes up every once in a while, and we always kind of like chat and intersect at nationals, and I know a few of the Vancouverites have flown or driven over to some of your PQs and stuff, but
yeah, just a quick funny aside, but I was listening to the On the Bobble episode where Jay kind of called us soft, and we kind of shared that around a little bit, and
we took it personally.
It made us practice a little bit harder.
It definitely motivated a group of people here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jay, Jay, not one to mince his words sometimes. I haven't really like gone out. I actually haven't been able to go out and attend one of your RTNs or PQs, so I don't have too much of an opinion. But I know that I know a number of you are pretty strong. Like there are people that do well at Nats every year, and
Yeah. No. It's
yeah.
just a funny story. We don't take it personally, but
I'm glad that it had sort of like a positive outcome, and that like people are like, oh, we're gonna train and we're gonna show them. That's always a good way to handle that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. One of the best parts about FAB actually for me is igniting some of that competitive spirit within me, but in a very healthy way, because we do the same thing with the folks from Edmonton, and we kind of rib each other and give each other a hard time, but it's all in good fun.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, we'll move on to our next topic here. And Yuki, I think the first time I played against you was online, and you were playing Prism, and I understood that you were playing Prism for a while. And after that, of course, you're very well known for Lexi and Icelander. And some people just say you're a specialist because you're very dedicated to those particular heroes. So I'm just curious, first of all, what is it about those heroes that resonates with you or makes you want to play them, whether they're in the meta or out of the meta, or good or bad?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think they all kind of have some similarities. They feel very interactive, and I think I like, maybe it's like coming from playing Magic, like I always like playing like the blue interactive decks in Magic, where you're interacting on your opponent's turn and you're doing a lot of that, whether it's like a more aggressive strategy or a more controlling one. But I kind of see these decks as that in Flesh and Blood. They're presenting a lot of problems and trying to like take your opponent off of their game plan, and I like that kind of like tempo-ish gameplay. And Lexi may not really be that much of a tempo deck anymore. I think she's just a very, very good aggressive deck with a little bit of disruption. But for a long time she was. I think when she was an ice hero, she was like the closest thing that Flesh and Blood had to a tempo deck. You were really controlling the flow of the game, and that was so much of the hero, and I really enjoyed that about her. And I think Icelander sort of has a lot of similarities there. You're doing it at instant speed and on your opponent's turn, but there's a lot of like very careful interaction and understanding how your opponent's turn is likely to play out and how you can interact and disrupt that. And I find that really satisfying. Prism, maybe slightly less interactive, but there is something about like creating these board states and understanding how your opponent can interact with your board state and how you can make it very difficult for them to interact. So I found something about like that trade-off of when do I develop auras versus push damage, and what is my role in the game, and that always being fluid, being really fascinating. And so many decisions around like, because so many of your cards are yellow, which ones do I play, which ones do I block with? They're all kind of good, and I need to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing right now at any given time. And I see similarities there for Icelander and Prism for sure, because Icelander is so blue heavy as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of what draws me towards those decks. I do play other decks, like I've played, especially back in the day, I played Viscerai a lot, but I think I've kind of figured out that I don't tend to like the pure aggro decks as much. I like the decks that can be a little bit more mid-rangey, play a little bit of a longer game, and to me that feels just like a little bit more controlled, or like a little bit less random. Like I get frustrated if I play Briar and I'm like, well, I just hope I see Channel Mount. I don't see Channel Mount, and I'm just like, why do I have this hand that doesn't do anything? Like that just drives me nuts. So yeah, some combination of the tempo aspects interacting with your opponent and the consistency of the decks. I think that's kind of why I've gone back to Lexi a lot lately, is the deck is just so much more consistent now, which is, yeah, nice.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, some of my favorite matches that I've watched of you, I think, were during Pro Tour, was it Season 2, when you played Lexi into the Starvo meta?
That would have been the first Pro
Okay.
Tour.
Yeah. And I mean, it just spoke to me how much you connected with a hero like Lexi, despite the fact that Starvo and Chain were running around everywhere, that you still stuck to your guns and found a way to make it work, obviously. Because if I recall, you still did pretty well at that event. And I guess looking at that and just thinking about how unfavored people like considered Lexi to be at the time, but you still found a way to make it work. If things were even worse, and if all of your selected heroes were truly in like tier D or unplayable into the meta, do you think you would still try to find a way to make it work, just stick to your guns, or would that move you to another hero?
No, I think I would play something else. I like playing decks that I enjoy, but I need to believe that I'm giving myself a good shot. And
I see.
Lexi for Pro Tour 1 was a deck that we deliberated on a lot. It felt close, but not good enough for a long time. I thought I was going to play Prism, but then I realized Prism had some like pretty big problems into Chain if the Chain was strong enough. Was what I was finding. And it was actually like very stressful. I wasn't sure what I was going to be playing for the event. I didn't like any of my options. I couldn't solve. We were pretty happy with the Starvo and the Chain matchup, but we couldn't solve the Prism matchup. It felt really, really hard if the Prism knew what they were doing. And we happened to kind of like a couple of days before the event figure out a way to change our sideboard, change the way we're approaching the matchup, and get it pretty close to 50-50. And we felt like it was kind of a very good choice for the event. And I considered just learning Chain or learning Starvo, but I was kind of intimidated by the decks. I felt like I wouldn't be good enough in the mirror playing Starvo, and I felt like Chain is just like a pretty hard deck that I didn't have that much experience on. These days, I think I'm intimidated a lot less by decks. Right. I had the experience of like picking up Kano and Blitz, and Kano players love to tell you how hard Kano is. And then I was like, I'm not the best Kano in the world by any means. Like, I'm sure the Kano mains know a lot that I don't know, but this isn't as bad as I thought it would be after I played it a bit. So trying to like have some confidence in myself that, I can pick up a deck if I need to. And yeah, kind of getting back to your original question, I do have strong preferences for decks, and I will try to make those decks work. But if I don't think that they're a competitive choice, I won't bring them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I do appreciate the shots fired at the Kano players out there. You're
But sometimes it's hard to see how a deck operates from the other side, and you really have to like pick it up and play it to understand what it is that they're doing and the decisions that they're making when they're holding hidden information. Because I also felt intimidated before I picked up Kano, and I'm like, yeah, it's not that hard to play, but definitely the other night in a Blitz Armory, Isaiah showed me lines that I could not conceive to pull a win out, and I was like, I don't know how you can reconsider that, but I thought my general Kano play was okay because of the experience of playing against other Kanos, but yeah. So I get it.
So I guess just as the FAB meta develops and the top tier of the professional players continues to be refined, do you see eventually the best of the best players being hero agnostic and just truly no preferences? They're just robots that see the best value in any deck? Or do you think that there's still some value in being a specialist and having preferred heroes?
It's like kind of both. I think Pablo actually wrote an article about this that was really wonderful. And he talked about how he is very much not a specialist and he plays every deck, and that helps him. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. And I do some of that too, in testing and in casual games and everything. I try to play every deck at least a little bit so I understand it. And I do think that you need to have that range to really excel at to really push up into the upper levels. I think you need to understand what every deck is doing. But that being said, there's a lot of heroes in Flesh and Blood, and they keep adding more. And yeah, some of them LL out, but you can't really be a master at all of them. At least most of us can. Maybe Pablo can, but most of us can't be a master at all of them. There's probably some that we're more comfortable with than others. And I think that what I've found is I've actually taken great comfort in having, especially in this meta, like this meta is obviously very good for me because Lexi and Icelander have been fantastic, but I've always liked having a hero like Lexi or like Prism in my back pocket, so to speak, where I feel like, I'll kind of try it out at the very start, have an idea of what I think of the deck, and then I think once Dusk Till Dawn came out, I spent like a month or something just playing with all the new Dusk Till Dawn heroes and seeing, did any of them seem good? Was there stuff to explore? And just trying to learn as much as I could about those. And knowing that, well, if it doesn't work out, I can give myself a couple weeks and tune the Lexi deck and jump back on that. And it's like, it's going to be no problem. I know that deck really well. So I think having that like comfort pick to fall back on is really nice and can kind of let you explore other options. And they don't always work out, like I spent a bunch of time on Vincent and a bunch of time on Bolton, and I thought there was something there in both cases. And then it was like, okay, maybe not, but it's nice to be able to do those things. And I think that, so yeah, I think being a specialist can kind of like help you also expand and play other things. But I think it's hard to truly like master every deck in the format. It's a pretty daunting task.
How long do you spend on testing those new heroes?
It kind of depends. I usually try to give a deck like at least a week. I would say it depends a lot on, to some degree, like how the games are going. Like, do they feel close, or are the games just never close?
Yeah.
Especially into like the top decks. Like, does this seem like this is at all viable or not? And it also kind of depends on like, okay, maybe this didn't work, but do I have ideas on how to fix it? And if I do, then I'll keep trying those ideas. But if I start running to the point where I'm like, I don't really know where to take this deck from here or how to fix these problems, I can't really find anything, I'm pretty willing to move off of them and wait until, maybe somebody has an awesome event and they figure it out. And then I go, okay, yeah, I'll take another look. But if I'm kind of reaching that point of like, I don't get it, or like, I don't know how to make this work, I'll move off of it and I'll switch to something else. So I'd say like usually a week, but some decks definitely more, especially if they feel really, really close. I think the ones that are close are the hardest ones to evaluate. Like often if they're not good, you can figure out they're not good pretty quickly. But when it's like, maybe this is like a tier 2 deck and I'm hoping to take a tier 1.5 or a tier 1 deck, that can be a little bit harder to find.
Is this also an area where you rely on other people's opinion and testing procedures as well when they're either trying the same heroes or even heroes that are not part of the release set and feel like they have something there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so in my testing team, we have a whole bunch of people on Discord, and we'll be sharing our thoughts about different heroes and different builds. And usually some people are more focused on a certain hero. Like there'll be like a couple of us working on Bolton, a couple of us working on Vincent, a couple of us working on Levia, kind of a thing. And not to say that there's no overlap or we don't help or give input. But often we kind of like have a little bit of a divide and conquer kind of a thing. Like it's not like we really like assign it, but you know, people try to spread out. I'll often try to spread out in the sense that like nobody's working on this hero, so I'm going to be the person to work on that hero, and I'll try to make sure that that happens. But yeah, definitely it's hard to cover all your bases, and having somebody to bounce ideas off of and kind of bring in new ideas is really, really valuable. It's hard to build a deck entirely by yourself.
Yeah.
Just my last question about hero selection is, for a lot of more casual players of Flesh and Blood, they're really drawn to a hero because of their story or their art style or their design or something like that. But from your perspective as a much more competitive player aiming to get those top results, are those things important to you at all? Do they add to the enjoyment of the game for you?
Yeah, those things do matter. I feel like if I like the hero from an aesthetic perspective or their backstory or whatever, like that is exciting and cool. I would say that just like as a person, I tend to be, when it comes to card games or games in general, like maybe it's just flesh and blood, I don't know, but I'm not as invested in the stories, and I tend to be more personally invested in like both the aesthetic and the gameplay, just in terms of like, is this fun or enjoyable or compelling to me, or like, for example, like what made me really like Ranger was how resonant the design of Ranger felt, like the whole like loading an arrow and take your arsenal and shooting it, like that just felt really right and really cool, and I really enjoyed that. So I think I'm most drawn to like gameplay reasons for liking heroes, but yeah, for sure, it matters a lot. And even though I will try to take the deck that I think is right, I will also try pretty hard to make another deck that I enjoy more work if I can.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's and that's, I'm somewhat relieved to to hear that answer, to be honest, that you can be a very good competitive player while still not having to, again, be a emotionless robot that just ignore the art. It's just ones and zeros and math, and there's still a little bit there that speaks to all of us.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is just understanding that sometimes no matter how much you like a hero, it's not the right event for it. And not even that you can't play your hero at that event, but just understanding like, what is it that you want to get out of that event? Am I going into that event trying to win? Because if I am, this hero is a really bad choice, and I need to like be honest and upfront with myself. And I talk to my teammates about this sometimes. I'm like, look, I'm not going to tell you not to bring that hero, but if you're trying to win, like, don't bring that hero. If you want to go in and you want to have fun, yeah, bring that hero. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. We're all playing for fun. Even when I'm trying to win, I'm playing for fun. I'm playing because I enjoy it. So if that's your priority, then yeah, by all means, play it. But you do kind of need to be honest with yourself to some degree about how strong the deck is and if that's something that is important to you. And it could be that it's not important to you, and I think that's really cool. And everybody enjoys card games in different ways. And, I don't want to take away from that. I don't think one of my locals, he said, I'm really not liking this meta very much. And this is a guy that has won, I think, like US Nationals for Netrunner. So very competitive guy. But he's like, for the Calling Las Vegas, I just want to play Pummel Vincent. It's not the best deck, but I just want to pummel people, and I'm going to count how many times I pummel people at the event. And he was having the best time in between rounds. He was like telling us a pummel counter, telling us about like these wacky stories about how his opponents like had no idea what Vincent does, and he was just like having a blast. I'm like, that's cool. Like that's really fun, and there's nothing wrong with doing that in an event, but don't mix that up for trying to win the event. Like those are two separate things, and sometimes they line up, but most of the time they may not. And, it just depends what you're looking for.
Back at the start of the episode, you kind of touched on some personal life changes that you were making. You've recently become a full-time FAB coach and content creator. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what led to that decision?
Yeah, a lot of it was just, I didn't really realize this, but I'm only allowed to take 3 days off per calendar year as like an unpaid leave. And for whatever reason, I didn't run into problems with this. I think it was just like, I guess what it was last year. I don't even know. I just like somehow didn't run into this issue last year. Like Leo was in summer, so that wasn't a problem. And then like, I guess I was able to go to Worlds and that was no issue. But then when it came to Baltimore, they said, oh, you've used too many days. And I ended up getting to make a request and getting to take that time off work and getting to go, but it was like a little bit of a battle. And I kind of realized like I can't keep doing this from like a logistical point of view, and also just from a like, I don't think it was good for me. I think especially like around report cards, like report cards were often lining up with major events, and just like that combination of report cards and marking everything in major event, like it was really taking its toll, and I was feeling extremely run down and burnt out. And something just like kind of had to give. And I ended up feeling like I'm at a point in my career as a teacher where I have quite a bit of seniority. I don't actually have a regular classroom job. I actually probably could have gotten a regular classroom job. I think the classroom job I've been trying to get came up, and I don't know if I would have got it or not, but likely. But I just ended up feeling like, my chance to play Flesh and Blood and do that is right now. Like, I'm good at this right now. And if I, if I take a break and come back to it 2 years from now, like, I don't know. I don't know if I will still have this opportunity. So it felt like if I want to do this, I should do it while I can. And teaching is great in the sense that I can go back to it and I still have all my seniority if I want to. And I can substitute for 2 weeks when I'm in town to make a little bit more money and then go off and travel for 2 weeks to Barcelona if that's what I want to do. And having that flexibility is like very incredible and helps me. Like, I feel very lucky that it's kind of like worked out where it's not like the exact job I was doing, but by substituting, which is like very, very in line with my job, I just have this like incredible flexibility and safety net to just try it out and do it if it's working. And if it's not working so much, then I can go back to substituting a little bit more and just kind of make it all work. So it's been a lot of that. I think part of what made me consider it too was just like coaching and writing. I think I make comparable amount to what I make teaching, maybe slightly more per hour, but it's like a little bit harder to schedule and everything. But it made me feel like, like if this can scale up, like there's something there. It can maybe work. And so I'm kind of excited to explore that and give it a shot. So I don't know. The true answer is like, I don't know if this is going to work out. I don't know if this is like the best choice, but I felt like I needed a break anyways. And if I don't do it now, I'm not going to get to do it. And I'd rather try and know that it didn't work out than be afraid and then go, oh, I wonder what would have happened. I think that would really not sit well with me, that not knowing if I could have done something or not.
Yeah, the flexibility sounds really great to be able to do that and try that. Was there something about FAB's long-term trajectory that gave you maybe the confidence to also leap into this and try this?
Yeah, I've just always been really impressed with LSS as a company. And when I listen, like James White had a recent interview on the Instant Speed podcast, and just like every time I listen to a James White interview, I'm like, this guy is really incredible. Like, he knows so much about this game. He's thought about so much. His head is in such a good place. And like, I just feel like the game is in such good hands. And it's not to say like everything's been perfect. Of course, there's areas that can be improved, but he just has such a good mindset about how to do that and how to constantly grow and evolve and adapt. And I think that leadership and the community of Flesh and Blood has made me really feel keen about it. I kind of don't have any doubts about the game doing well. And like, I don't know. I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, maybe Flesh and Blood won't make it. Like, in my eyes, like, it kind of already is making it. And as long as nothing goes super wrong, I don't see why I won't be here to stay. And I don't know. I believe in LSS. I don't think the game's going anywhere.
Yeah, I think Felix are in the same boat. And I love listening to James White talk about the game and his, like you already mentioned, his passion, his thoughts, and how deep they've gone in the creation of this game and what they have coming down the pipe. Just gives me a bunch of confidence in that they are going to strive. And like we've talked about before, when they do make mistakes, they fess up to those mistakes and they kind of communicate with the community at large, saying, hey, yeah, we screwed up, or this is what we're going to do to try and fix things going forward. And that, it also gives us confidence that, that the game is going in the right direction, as it were.
Yeah. I think that open dialogue between LSS and the community is really something that a lot of companies try to do or strive for, but I think that they've really, for whatever reason, they're very good at it, and they've really kind of excelled at having that open dialogue and having that positive relationship with the community, which is so nice to see, especially compared to like, you know, when I just quit Magic and so many people are just like very critical and distrusting of Wizards right now. So yeah, it's nice to see, and it matters a lot, I think.
You mentioned writing, and you're also doing the coaching as well as being a professional player. Are these things that you're enjoying so far? And is there any other, I guess, little areas that you might be looking forward to branching out to expanding your FAB content?
Yeah, everything's been really enjoyable. I like it a lot. I'm sort of trying to figure out what I want to do in terms of FAB content. I've been meaning to get back to writing. I haven't been writing as regularly as I was at one point, and I want to do more of it. So we'll see if we can make that happen. Hopefully having more time will help with that. And I know that some players like Mara, for example, has a Patreon, and I'm sort of curious to explore that, but I'm also not sure. I don't know. I think there's like a lot of planning that needs to go into that, and I'm not exactly sure like what I would be offering for different levels of support. And so I don't know. I don't want to just like jump into that and have it be not kind of half baked. I'd rather have it really well thought out. So it's something on my radar and something I've been thinking about, but I haven't quite landed on something that feels right. So I haven't started it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about coaching. And to be quite honest, I'm surprised how many people out there get coaching for things like golf or tennis or piano, anyone picking up something very difficult and just wants to jumpstart their learning. But it's still not very common, or at least I found it's not very common for people to seek that out for things like Flesh and Blood. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective as a coach, what is something that someone like yourself or a coach can provide above and beyond just someone going out and playing games among their community and, you know, looking at YouTube and reading Discord and all of that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. It kind of depends on the player and where they're at, I think. I can give you some examples of things that I work on with players. So one of the ones for newer players, especially, is they're just like, I can't win any games and I don't know why I'm losing. Or I feel like I'm not very good at this and I've been playing for a while and I don't feel like I'm getting better, or I don't know what I should be working on. So we can try and identify some of those areas that can be improved on and give some like ways to think about it and some ways to practice it. And I'll say right away that the most common one is just having like a basic framework of value. So like the total attack and defense of your hand and making that as big as possible and valuing on hits. Michael Hamilton has talked a lot about this. I think like Fino has put out some content around value as well, but it's not all of Flesh and Blood, but it is a very big fundamental concept. And I think that often for newer players, just like hearing that and working through it with examples of like, okay, here's a situation, let's evaluate it and count the value and go, okay, which one, what's the best play here? And like just doing that again and again can help them kind of see how to think about the game in a more, I guess, like more structured way, and in a way that a lot of competitive players are thinking about the game. For other players, it can be things like, I feel pretty good and I understand the game, but I don't understand this matchup. And can we work on this matchup? And we'll talk a lot about the matchup. We might play it a little bit. We might look at VODs of it, but we can really kind of hone in on that matchup and try and work on it. It could be things like sideboard guides or like tweaking deck lists and getting them ready for the events and go, I don't know how to decide between this sideboard card or this sideboard card, and I can go through that with them and do that. And sometimes the really strong players will actually mostly just chat, and it will be about it will just be kind of like about all their matchups, and they'll go like, here's what I'm doing into this deck. What do you think of that? And I'll go, have you considered approaching it in this way, or trying these sideboard plans, or, talking about recent deck lists out there and why I think the cards are in those players' decks, those kinds of things. So it very much depends on like where the player is at, but it can go anywhere from like learning those foundational pieces to specific things like sideboards or builds, or just, event prep and getting ready for them, and some really like kind of targeted niche interactions. So yeah, I usually kind of try and tailor it to what the person is looking for and kind of where they're at. But those are kind of the most common things that I do.
No, that's really cool. And it's really cool to hear that you work with people of all different skill levels, not just players that are already very good and just looking for a little tweak, but it sounds like you also help people out in the more beginning stages of the learning curve as well. Like, is that something where you bring in your experience as a classroom teacher to just, or how does that work, I guess, with your previous experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think it helps me, or it kind of like informs my approach is the way I would say it. There's a lot of like the idea of like teaching a concept and then giving examples and working through those examples with them, and then trying to progress to like, okay, we've done some examples, here's another one, you talk me through it. And so kind of getting that progression of like, I'm going to show you something, we're going to do it together, then you're going to try and do it on your own. And then, maybe you go and you play some armories and you come back and we see how you're doing, kind of a thing. So that kind of like, I guess just like gradual approach, or like scaffolding, where I can help people build up skills gradually with varying levels of support as they get more comfortable, is something that is done a lot in teaching, and I think applies really nicely, especially for the more kind of like fundamental concepts.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Regarding your dual status of very top level, professional level player, but also being a mentor, do you ever run into a situation where you're working on something with your team, for example, for an upcoming event, and potentially there could be a conflict with something that your student wants to discuss? How do you keep those separate?
Yeah, so I'm usually pretty upfront about that with my students. I've had students ask me for like, can you make a deck list for me? And I go, well, it's hard for me to really authentically make a deck list for you, because the way that I would build the deck list is not just my own, it's my team's. And so I can't share that. But what I can do, and what I often offer to people and has worked really well, is I'll say, why don't you pick some lists from recent events that you like, and we can talk about them. And I can tell you what I like about them, what I don't like about them, what I think some of their strengths and weaknesses are, what are some options in terms of what we can tweak, and I can help you build that into a deck that you like. So that's often kind of my approach, is that I can't necessarily share what I'm working on, but I can give you my thoughts and what I think about what other people are doing, and try and help build that deck to something that is hopefully more suited for that person and performs better at whatever event they're going to.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And can you share some success stories from your students, or even more generally, what's your proudest moment in your coaching or FAB teaching career so far?
I always like hearing I always tell my students, like, tell me how the event goes. I want to hear, because I'm invested in them doing well. And I've had a number of students like who have set goals, like I really want to like top 8 a ProQuest, and then hearing them do that is really exciting. So I've had that happen a few times. I've had students go and say like, there was this game that I had a student tell me, like, there was this game that I almost made a play, and then I thought about what we talked about with value and thinking about the on hit, and I made myself go through that, and then I made a different play than I was originally going to, and I think I only won the game because I did that. And it was like, that's awesome, like that's what you want to be doing. So I think just like hearing those stories of people like meeting their goals, or feeling like they're seeing what we're talking about pay off in their actual games is always like the most special thing to me. And just seeing them like grow and do better at events and have more fun with the game.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I mean, your passion and care for your students really is evident to us, both in terms of what you're saying, but also, this is an audio only podcast, but I can see it with the way that you're talking now as well. So that's really awesome. Guess my last question on this topic is, if you could give one tip for free to, I guess, just the average player out there, what's the common blind spot that people have, or what's a common mistake that you see, or a bad habit that people have that you find you have to correct first thing?
The biggest one by far is value, like I mentioned before. Just making sure that when you play out your hand, you're trying to get the most combined attack value and block value out of your hand as possible. And then I guess kind of the next extension and level up of that is, okay, you're now doing that. Now you also need to consider the on hits that you're potentially stopping. So if you block a heat seeker for 5, you're not really blocking 5, you're blocking 7, for example, as like a really tangible one. And talking about ways to like think of like an extra card is worth 3, and there's like kind of all these rules of thumb. I think that kind of value framework is by far the most common and most important one. After that, it's probably just trying to understand like how you actually win the game and what a winning end game looks like. I think that's like the next one, and is considerably harder to teach because it's quite variable. But I think a lot of players have like a really great idea of mid games, but they make kind of like critical decisions transitioning from the mid game to the end game and wind up in these spots where they actually can't win. And maybe had they blocked a little bit more and kept a little bit more life, even though it's like value neutral, like it's the same value, they would be in a better spot because they can later take a hit to do whatever they need to do to win the game. So yeah, those are probably the two things that I see most frequently, but value is head and shoulders above the other one for sure.
Yeah, values like the basic arithmetic of FAB at this point, or your times tables or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not everything. That's like the cool thing is like, I don't think it's just value. There's a lot of interesting decisions that don't boil down to just value. But I think for a lot of players, if you just do the most value efficient thing all the time, you would do a lot better. Even if it's not always the right decision, it's just like overwhelmingly the correct decision.
Yuki, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Was there anything like a favorite moment in Flesh and Blood that you wanted to share with our listeners before we close out the episode?
So I don't know if this fully answers your question, but I think my favorite moments in Flesh and Blood are always centered around like the social aspects of the game. And so many of them are tied up with my testing team. And I know that like not everybody has a testing team, and people go, oh, like I don't have that. But like my testing team is primarily my friends. Like I'm not part of the Wolf Pack or anything like that. We're not sponsored. Our team is called Team Stroop Waffle. We're pretty laid back. And primarily we're a friend group. And I think a lot of people have that. They have friends that they play games with, and that's what it feels like for me. And so I just love sharing events with those people and sharing like, when I do well, but also when they do well, and seeing like my teammates top 8 or win or have a good run at an event when they've been having a bad run for a long time, but I know they've been working really hard. Those are so many of my favorite moments, is just getting to like be at events with my friends and check in with them and see that, even if I had a bad weekend, that, Zane or Ian or someone else had a fantastic one. And yeah, that's probably my favorite thing in Flesh and Blood by far.
No, that's a great answer. It was kind of funny while you were sitting there thinking about the answer. I was kind of already coming to the conclusion in a way, I don't know why, that I thought that it was going to be something to do with your friends and their experiences and how you and they get to reap rewards in everybody's successes, because it's definitely a common topic among people that are playing this game with a bunch of people that they know or have come to know through armories or online skirmishes, whatever it is, that they've created these friend groups and they spend time with each other. You want to see, I don't have to succeed. It's great if I do, but it's just as rewarding to see those people succeed and do well in the events that you spent time with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, like you said, like these are friendships that have come together because of Flesh and Blood, and they're not people that I knew beforehand. And I think that's really, and they're like some of the most important people in the world to me now. And I think that's really special. And like my testing team is like people from all over. Like we have people from Vancouver, we have people from Toronto, we have people from the Netherlands and Germany. Like it's, somebody from New Zealand, like it's just a bunch of people from the US. Like we're just literally all over the place. And it's just kind of amazing that we can all come together and share these events and share these moments and have this commonality that honestly, I don't know how we ever would have all gotten to know each other otherwise. It just, there's no way.
Yeah. We're just about to wrap up here. Do you have any closing thoughts about anything that you want to share or any shout outs while you're here?
Yeah, I'll give some shout outs to just everyone that I test with in Team Stroopwafel, my local Vancouver scene, and all of the Canadians, actually. I've been noticing more and more, I feel like Canada has been becoming kind of close-knit. Like I think for like a long time going into events, there was kind of like the Toronto scene and then the Vancouver scene and then the Alberta scene, and they're like all kind of separate, and more there's been like exchange of ideas and information. I've really felt that at the calling, that we're all just we're Canadians and we're all kind of working together, and I think that that's really cool and really lovely to see. So I've been enjoying that evolution a lot.
Sorry, I have one more question. Who came up with Team Stroopwafel?
It's sort of a joke because we have a few Dutchies on the team, and one of them, Jimmy Nguyen, loves stroopwafels and always talks about them, and he always tells people how they have to try stroopwafels, and sometimes he would make jokes about how like, oh, you owe me a stroopwafel. And then we're playing an online, like the team league, the FAB team league, and I don't think we did that well. We just people just played whatever they wanted to play, and it was, it didn't go our way. But we needed a team name, and went, well, what should we name it? And we did it that because of some of the inside jokes about stroopwafels, and it just kind of stuck.
Awesome. If anybody wanted to reach out to you to contact you for coaching or any insight, where can they reach you at?
Yeah, you can reach me at, you could DM me or tweet at me at Yuki Lee Bender, or you can message me on Discord as well. I'm YLBTCG that's the Discord tag. So either of those work really well for me. I'm usually a little more responsive on Discord than Twitter, but I do get back to people eventually on Twitter. It just might take me a day or so.
Right. And thank you so much for listening to the IP2 podcast. You can reach us on YouTube, IP2 Podcast, on Twitter, IP2 Podcast, on Mastodon, IP2 Podcast, at wraith.social. Thank you.
I'm really glad the answer was more in depth than just working on tuna counters at the start of your turn.
It's
free value you're bleeding if you miss that. It's awesome.
Yeah, that tuna counter is important.